Good day. Welcome to Dutchess Talk Radio. I'm John Marino, and we are produced by Sharc Creative, made possible by Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center, supporting our communities right through April of 2021. We are joined today by Dutchess County Executive Marc Molinaro. Marc Molinaro, we thank you for joining us here on the Cup of Joe political show on Dutchess Talk Radio. We've had a storm to deal with, maybe more on the way. How has the storm preparation been going for what might be coming, and how has dealing with what happened already been going?
Well, it's funny. I was watching the news, the weather forecasts across the country earlier in this week, and they announced in Florida there was going to be a downturn in temperature and that iguanas would be falling from trees. In fact, that is an actual weather warning, iguanas falling from trees. So it kind of makes the snowstorm seem a little less of a concern. This was a traditional nor'easter, the good old-fashioned snowstorm, and interestingly enough, it was exactly what they predicted. Maybe give or take an inch or two, but it was a massive geography covered. Millions of Americans within that storm at the same time. It did slow down as it came into the Hudson Valley, as they tend to, but it slowed down and kind of hunkered around over us for a bit. So, I would note that Dutchess saw between 15 and 26 inches, depending on where you are. Thankfully, we were at full complement with our highway crews. We didn't have anyone out in isolation, any COVID-related restrictions. So our folks began plowing and treating a little bit after midnight, the day of the storm, and we all did our best to clean up. I think actually it went very well. Our crews, local, state, county crews worked 36, 40 hours. And thankfully, the winds picked up only enough to be interesting, but not so much to cause any major power outages. And thankfully, we weathered that storm, getting ready for the next one.
Now, tell me, why do areas like Dutchess and Putnam and Orange seem to clean their roads much quicker and much more effectively than, say, in New York City?
Well, listen, in fairness to the city, first of all, our roads are not the same, right? We have most of our highways and roadways have shoulders and areas where when you come through, you're pushing the snow so far out, no one's going to pay attention. New York City, you're doing it, up against parked cars and curb lines. We also have less traffic, and that's the reality. It just is, right? Less cars on the road, less things to have to maneuver around. Could they do it better in the city? Probably. Certainly. But it is a different challenge. I was a village mayor, not even on the same scale, but
in Tivoli, at the age of 19, youngest mayor in America, right?
Nice, absolutely. But I will tell you, snow plowing in Tivoli is a lot different than snow plowing in most of the suburban and rural parts of Dutchess. It's just a densely populated area, and you're working around a lot of other challenges. It's funny, though, some of those county roads are actually in villages and cities, so we learn how to deal with it. But if Mayor de Blasio wants a lesson or two, or whoever the next mayor is, one of 17 candidates, we'll be happy to give them what advice we can.
Okay. How about the COVID pandemic? How has it affected Dutchess County?
Yeah, listen, we're now nearing 12 months of response. January of this year was the deadliest of the 12 months during this pandemic. We had over 100 individuals succumb to the virus. We're now tracking about 1,500 active cases, but about 400 deaths in Dutchess County, and it's just heartbreaking. Add to that the restrictions, the closures, the economic shutdown for that period of time, and still businesses that aren't necessarily able to function at capacity really has just been devastating. I will tell you, though, as challenging as it's been, residents have been relatively understanding, although I think being pent up at home, is both financially stressful and socially stressful, but it's given them too much time to be on social media. So people tend to, I think, vent a little bit more on Facebook and Twitter. But overall, our community, I think, has risen to the challenge. I've seen great resilience in our community. We just are at a point now where, though too many are just hanging on, and we really have to work harder. I think the federal government needs to come through with real direct aid, in particular to small businesses, the local governments as well. And the state government has to do more to provide relief, in particular to struggling families, small businesses, farmers, those that just will not be able to get back on their feet without some relief. And we're hopeful that happens. The other is, I think, as you've been seeing, the governor has changed strategies. I don't know if it's intentional or just, a result of external factors, but Even he's talking about, well, we have to reopen the economy. Well, okay, so let's make sure that we're doing it as effectively as possible and working together. And quite frankly, we've got our differences and real challenges front. But overall, the community, I think, has responded really, really well. Too many have struggled too hard for too long, and they all need a bit of relief.
Does Dutchess have enough vaccines to go around?
No, God, no. I mean, listen, the entire vaccine rollout, quite frankly, from Washington to Albany has been too chaotic. I think that the former administration worked very hard to get the vaccine on the ground. I mean, promising to pay for vaccines puts money in the hands potentially of these companies to produce, and I think that worked really effectively. But not being able to project out the numbers of doses coming from the federal government to the states created a problem. And then anything that anyone can do anywhere in America, Albany, can make more complicated. And so what we've seen is, this sort of chaotic and very cumbersome process. I mean, it begins with supply and demand, no question. New York is likely to receive about 300,000 doses this week. But the state system of sharing those doses and allotting those doses just isn't equitable, and it doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. Counties for years are mandated by the state of New York. You pay us to develop vaccine distribution plans. In fact, in late October of last year, we were asked to update those plans. We were expecting that they would be implemented. The governor chose not to do that, and I think, quite frankly, really has created this chaotic system. And the analogy I'd offer to you is that, vaccine rollout, of course, it is hope. It is light at the end of the tunnel. People really, really understand this. And for us, it is very much a fulfillment of the work we ought to do. And I know you know this, but for me personally, having lost my father in a hospital in Westchester to this very virus, it is personally for me a mission, right? This is the thing I can do to give meaning to the loss. The analogy I would use is, we're very early in a baseball game, probably the second inning, but the governor needs to understand we are really far behind. I mean, they've scored like 10 or 15 runs ahead of us, and he's keeping his best players on the sidelines, the local health departments, federal health clinics, the folks who do this, healthcare networks, major networks like Caramount and Crystal Run and Premier, they're being held on the sidelines. They're not given the doses. And so we're not able to affect or help people all that much. And so you've got to get us in the game. There's still time to catch up. But sidelining your best players is just a moronic idea and not really very effective in addressing the vaccination. The other, I'll say to you is we've all been prepared for this, right? So not only do we have the plans, we have the infrastructure, we have the relationships. That really ought to be what we're focused on. And instead, the state diverts thousands of doses to regional sites and doesn't tell anybody about those other locations or give capacity to those other locations like local health departments. And that just is creating this very, very anger-filled system. And I understand why. I mean, the public is just outraged. And they vent to the people they can. I've said the state is using county governments like vending machines. We really don't have a role in any of the coordination or the decision making, which we should. We're mandated by law, state law, to be a part of that decision making, and instead we're just a dispensary. They give us 700 doses a week, and we put shots in the arms of the people they tell us to put shots in the arms in. It's not logical, and it's also, I think, discredits and dismisses the important work that local health departments are really supposed to be engaged in.
How much has COVID affected the 2021 Dutchess budget?
It's interesting. I'm glad you're asking me this question in February, because if you asked me this question about 6 months ago, I would have told you it was devastating. Last year, 2020, we lost about $15 million in projected sales tax. So we start $15 million down. But I will argue, and I think successfully, that no county in New York came into this pandemic more fiscally prepared for this than Dutchess. We had the highest bond rating in the state. We had a substantial savings account, a fund balance for emergencies, and we had the ability to contract. We were able to really save dollars. What's occurred, though, in the last quarter of 2020, oddly, is that despite losing $15 million in projected sales tax in 2020, we're actually starting 2021 exactly where we budgeted we would start. So from a sales tax perspective and a revenue perspective, Dutchess County is exactly where we left off in 2019, which means we're just set back a year. Everyone, there are others who have had to deal with a hell of a lot worse than that. But for us, it sets the foundation in a place where we're safer. Now, the real challenge is that we have costs that we didn't project or budget for: vaccine distribution, continued pandemic. So without state and local aid from the federal government, that will really restrict our ability to do our work in 2021. But we start in a place that is much, much more secure than I would have predicted or anyone would have predicted a year ago. But it still is behind where we would have been had, of course, we not engaged in responding to this global crisis.
Dutchess County Executive Marc Molinaro here at Dutchess Talk Radio. I'm John Marino. Marc Molinaro, if you had a seat at the table up in Albany for the state budget negotiations going on right now, the budget is due April 1. That always seems to be a loose date. What would you ask for Dutchess County?
Well, that's a great question and not fair. But listen, I would offer. Globally, let's start with the state budget. I would say to you, there are two things that shouldn't happen. We can't balance the state budget on the backs of people who can't afford it, and we can't afford to raise taxes on the people who can't afford it. And I do think that Albany needs to understand that this is not the time to shift your woes onto overtaxed people, many of which are listening to you, right? Westchester, Dutchess, Hudson Valley property taxpayers cannot afford to shoulder that burden. So don't shift new costs to counties and local governments. Don't shift costs to middle-class workers. But you also have an obligation in Albany to focus at least what services you can on underserved communities, on communities that would be left without any lifeline. So public schools need to be protected to the extent they can. We can't cut services to those with disabilities and those living with substance use disorders. So really, this is, in one sense, it is a question for this governor. What are your priorities? Don't show me your budget, or don't tell me your priorities. Show me your budget. Your budget will reflect who in this state is in this moment of crisis the most needing our help. Now, from the county's perspective, just don't shift new costs to us. And that's the only thing we'd ask. The very specific thing that's really in the weeds, but it's important to counties. This year, for the first time ever, based on a budget decision last year, state of New York is actually taking sales tax money from us. So this is Dutchess County sales tax. Every county in the state, sales tax that we collect, they're actually taking money out of that bank account and giving it to hospitals across the state. Now, a year ago or a year and a half ago, you might have said, well, distressed hospitals are really struggling. The state's got to come up with a way to help them. But the truth is, last year, those very hospitals benefited by about $10 billion in federal aid. There is not a need in 2021 to take those dollars. And we would argue with the Biden administration focused on this new relief package that 2020 and 2021 are not the years to take that sales tax from counties. So even if you just would pause it, it's about $1 million to Dutchess County. Just pause it for 1 year. We'll revisit it. These hospitals across the state, none of them are Dutchess County hospitals. Yet I'm taking sales tax that you gave me when you shopped at the grocery store or the diner, or you bought your kids clothes or school supplies from home. That sales tax you expected would stay here for 911 services and emergency response and sheriff's offices. They're taking it and giving it away to an entire body of people who just don't need it this year. And that would be the thing specifically we'd ask. But again, this is a year of priorities. If you've got to be able to show that you're restricting spending and saving where you can, we just can't continue to spend the way we are and shift that burden on people who can't afford it.
All this talk about potentially legalizing marijuana and online gaming, are these attempts to raise tax money to close that budget gap?
Yes. Yes.
In short form, yes.
Listen, this governor's been in office for longer than any of us may want it to have been. But nevertheless, this governor's been in office now for 3 terms. So of course, I came in second to him in 2018.
We're going to get to
which
that.
As I tell people, I get the most votes of anybody who's ever come in second, at least in the last 25 years. But that said, the interesting thing, right? These are all issues that he claims to have been supporting for years, but was never motivated to get them done. So I would say yes, marijuana legalization, gambling, no matter what, in what sports gambling or even expansion of casinos, is all revenue driven. It is based on wanting to put new money in the coffers. I understand making those kinds of decisions, but call it what it is, and then speak to the ills associated. You can't agree to these things without also acknowledging the personal, social, and sort of public impact. And are you prepared for those? And I would tell you, New York is not. But again, we understand the drive to move forward. I've always supported decriminalization of marijuana. I think we've come far and long, and it's time to move on. But again, I don't think you make these decisions based on money. You should make them based on public health and be prepared for the social impacts of any of them.
Mm-hmm. Now, you ran for governor, as you alluded to, in 2018. What did you learn from that experience of running for governor?
It's funny. So I've had a little more time. I mean, I saw the worst of New York State politics, and whatever you think it is, if you're listening, however bad you think it is, it's worse. It's uglier. It's more corrupted than anyone should allow. And I truly have been so disheartened by that. And I will tell you now that it's been a couple of years, I almost let that steal the optimism and real love for public service that I have. It is genuine. I really love this work. I do. So I learned a lot about myself, and it was like running through a buzzsaw, running against Andrew Cuomo, which I accept. I'm glad. I also learned that, frankly, this is a beautiful state with beautiful people, no matter what party. I have to tell you, I can only point to about a handful of folks who made my life miserable as voters on the streets. I was from a subway platform in New York City to a farm in Malone or out in Buffalo eating buffalo wings. Most people were really good and really open to listening. I didn't win their votes, although I did win 2.2 million. But those are all things that I really appreciated and really learned. I will say this though, I knew this. New York State is in a real difficult bind, and you cannot continue to elect people who aren't going to take seriously the economic and the fiscal crisis that this state faced ahead of the pandemic. There's just no question. I also found there are a lot of elected officials who, they talk the talk, but they're not willing to walk the walk. They're just, honestly, empty suits or individuals that, frankly, they're collecting a paycheck, and they make you feel good. But they're not fighting the fight. And that doesn't mean, by the way, anger and violence. It means trying to bring people to a solution, trying to engage in things that sometimes aren't even very popular. And I found that there weren't enough of those. A lot of really decent and great people, but we need more people who are willing to take up the fight in that way in elected office, whether it's in Washington or Albany.
April 1st is less than 2 months away. That's when the budget is due. Also due on that date is the Governor Cuomo's mandate for individual communities across the state to present him with a police reform plan. Is that doable by April 1st, or is this just pie in the sky?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you think is what he wants. I mean, so the short answer is yes. And by the way, I'll offer to you in Dutchess County, we established a criminal justice council in the 1990s. It was actually the first in the nation, where we brought together all of the leadership in the criminal justice system, including formerly incarcerated mental health, social work, the district attorney, the public defender, sheriff's office, police departments. And they've been meeting for years. And what they do is look at our criminal justice system and try to modernize it all the time. So when the governor said to do this, I would argue in our case, there were advancements that needed, but we've always engaged. Dutchess was one of the first in the country to train every police officer in crisis intervention, give them de-escalation training, to prepare them with mental health first aid. Every officer on the street in Dutchess County trained in that way. We opened a stabilization center, which now allowed us to divert people with mental health issues from the criminal justice system to mental health care. We launched a mobile intervention team, which meant social workers responded with police officers. And to those listening who say, well, I want a cop to show up, understand law enforcement wants that resource. Police officers want someone in the mental health world to be able to turn to if they're responding to a mental health crisis. We've been doing this for about a decade now. And it's been very, very effective. And so the sheriff's office has developed a plan. Dutchess County led a coordinated effort. Sheriff Butch Anderson and I coordinated that with police agencies, supervisors, and mayors. We'll have our plan before the legislature in March, adopted ahead of the April deadline. We've encouraged municipalities to do the same. And I just would tell you that no matter what side of the aisle you are ideologically, giving police officers the best tools possible to be the best officers they can be is a good thing. Making sure that when somebody is confronted with even what you and I might think is a sort of a insignificant encounter, that could go wrong and sideways very, very quickly. And in giving them the tools and the resources that they need to make those choices, to be engaged in the community in a way that's effective, it doesn't always put them in a this position of supremacy, but rather making sure that we're protecting and serving. They want that. I haven't met a cop yet that said to me, no, please don't give me that training. Please don't give me that resource. So from our perspective, strengthening their ability to do their job well is our way of saying thank you to them, showing our gratitude to them, and saying to those who want to defund them, no, we want more resources to give them the ability to do their job well and protect us as I know they want to.
Mm-hmm. Now, State Attorney General Letitia James just issued a very scathing report about how the COVID crisis has been handled in this state, especially when it comes to the nursing home versus hospitals controversy and who died where, who got sick where. Your reaction to that report?
Well, listen, the Attorney General did her job and with the force of her office produced a report that exposed what we all thought. And that was that the decision to force nursing homes to accept COVID-positive patients resulted in many deaths. It just did. And the failure to, it did, I don't mean just did, it did. And the failure to report that either was an orchestrated deception, meaning they knew the information, didn't share it, and used that data to manipulate public policy, which is an outright betrayal, or they were so ignorant and so incapable of tracking that information that you really begin to wonder what is the effectiveness of state government. So I will tell you that is just the beginning. In fairness to anyone, I've made bad choices as a county executive and as a mayor and as a state legislator. When I'm confronted with that, I have two choices, one is to simply say you're wrong and I'm right, as the governor did, or to listen clearly, read the detail, and determine whether or not there's something to be learned here. What the governor, I think, listen, the decision was bad enough. And it did result in the loss of lives. It just did. And so we have to honor that and recognize that. And what the governor ought to do, in my opinion, is come clean. Just say perfectly, this is how we concluded this decision. And by the way, now in retrospect, you deserve my remorse. You deserve my commitment. You deserve to have every question answered and to reach out to these families and say, we have to provide you help and support. That is absolutely necessary. But what they did was just turn vindictively toward others and say, this is on you. This is political. What does it matter? Who cares where they died, he said. Who cares? My father died at Westchester Medical Center alone. I care. I care because in that moment, I would have wanted those moments, those minutes back. Think about the thousands of families that never got those opportunities. And instead of just being honest and saying, these were moments that were stolen from you and we want to get it right, they turned vindictively toward people and sort of dismissed the argument and said, yeah, of course, she did exactly what we already knew. No, that's not true. And it's not fair. And public policy was developed based on that bad information or deceptive information. And that needs to be confronted. The state legislature should subpoena, state legislature should conduct an investigation, and so should the federal government. That's the way it works in public office. You get held accountable by others in public office, whether you like it or not.
I look at this new report now that shows that with the vaccine rollout, it seems like nursing homes and rehab centers across New York State, permanent residents were able to get the vaccine, to get the COVID vaccine, but those who were coming in for a brief stay or were not permanent were not allowed to. It seems like there was no lesson learned from what happened back last March and April.
Well, you and I have discussed it. I mean, the vaccine rollout is an example of sort of repeating some of the same mistakes, and why we don't know. And so, in this case, though, and we've argued this point as well, yes, certainly the most vulnerable need to have access to the vaccines. Instead, they've opened it up and opened it up and opened it up and still only directed a handful of doses to communities like ours. We have the same scenario for those with disabilities. The state says you can vaccinate individuals who reside in a congregate care facility, but not those who take part in day-hab programs. So kids like my daughter, who ordinarily would participate in certain activities, now under the circumstances doesn't, but there are countless kids or young people or individuals who are at a day-hab center all day long. And the only difference between them and those who reside there are they go home to sleep. So if you're saying that population is at risk, if nursing home population is at risk, which of course it is, you would want to focus the resource and the attention around making sure vaccines get to those who fall within that category. And again, it seems like every Friday the governor announces something new that sort of stirs everything up again, and the system changes. And that's just it's not a coherent or reasonable way to coordinate a response to a global pandemic that's come home certainly a year ago to our communities.
Dutchess County Executive Marc Molinaro, we thank you for joining us today on Dutchess Talk Radio. Let's talk again.
Let's do that. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Be safe.
All the best. Thank you. Dutchess County Executive Marc Molinaro, Dutchess Talk Radio. I'm John Marino. We are produced by Sharc Creative, made possible by Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center, supporting our communities through April of 2021. Thank you for joining us here on the Cup of Joe Political Show. Catch all of our Dutchess, Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, and Fairfield County talk radio programming on our YouTube channel, Sharc Creative YouTube.